The stars are dying. One by one, like candles blown out by a cosmic wind, they began to fade across the night sky. First, distant galaxies grew dimmer, their spiral arms becoming ghostly traces. Then closer stars lost their shine. Scientists around the world noticed the change first, their instruments detecting the impossible before human eyes could see it. Dr. Hana Kim stood before her computer screen, rubbing her tired eyes. For weeks she had barely slept, checking and rechecking her calculations. The data couldn't be right, yet every test confirmed it. The room around her was cluttered with empty coffee cups and discarded papers, the walls covered with equations and graphs. "It's happening too fast," she whispered to herself. "Way too fast." The universe had always been expanding since the Big Bang, but something had changed. Dark energy, that mysterious force pushing everything apart, was growing stronger. Much stronger. Stars were being pulled away from each other at speeds never thought possible. When Hana presented her findings to the World Science Council, the room fell silent. No one wanted to believe it, but the evidence was clear. Within 50 years, maybe less, the night sky would go completely dark. Stars would become so distant from each other that their light would never reach another world again. Each planet, each civilization would be alone in the darkness forever. "We need to tell everyone," said Dr. Raj, an astronomer who had worked with Hana for years. His voice trembled. "The public needs to know." News spread quickly. Alien civilizations that humanity had been in contact with for decades shared their own findings. The Neridians, with their crystal technology, had already begun preparing their people for the end. The Volcar had turned to ancient religious practices, believing the dimming was punishment for their sins. Most species seemed resigned to their fate, to die alone in the growing darkness. But humans responded differently. Within days of the announcement, riots broke out in major cities. People fought over resources, believing the end was near. Others formed doomsday cults. Some wealthy individuals built bunkers deep underground, as if that would somehow save them from a dying universe. Yet even in chaos, humanity showed its true nature. A video went viral of a young girl named Min standing on her rooftop, pointing a small telescope at the fading stars. "I'm not going to stop looking up," she said, her voice clear and determined. "Not ever." The video reached Dr. Kim and touched something deep within her. She took it to President Yoon, who had been struggling to maintain order. "Maybe we need to stop thinking about how to survive this," Hana said, showing him the video. "Maybe we need to think about how to fight it." President Yoon called an emergency global summit. For the first time in history, nearly every nation sent representatives. Old enemies sat side by side. Political differences were set aside. The threat wasn't to a country or even to Earth. It was to existence itself. In a speech that would be remembered for generations, President Yoon addressed the world. Throughout history, humanity has faced what seemed like impossible challenges. Ice ages, plagues, world wars. Each time, we survived not just by enduring, but by innovating, by refusing to accept defeat. The universe itself is now challenging us. I say we accept that challenge. The Prometheus Initiative was born that day. Named after the mythical figure who stole fire from the gods to give to humanity, it would be the largest scientific collaboration in human history. The brightest minds from every field were recruited. Funding was unlimited. The mission was simple, yet impossible. Find a way to stop the accelerating expansion of the universe. Dr. Kim was appointed to lead the physics division. Her team worked around the clock, exploring theories that had once been considered fringe science. They built the largest particle accelerator ever conceived, stretching across what had once been a war zone between two countries. Meanwhile, engineers began drawing up plans for what they called ARCs, massive ships that could sustain human life for generations if the Prometheus Initiative failed. It would be humanity's backup plan, a way to survive even if they couldn't save the stars. The first major breakthrough came unexpectedly. Jun, a young physicist who had been Hana's student, discovered something strange in their experiments. When They accelerated particles to near light speed and then suddenly stopped them. They released a unique form of energy that seemed to push back against dark energy itself. "It's like finding a rock that falls up instead of down," June explained excitedly. "It breaks all the rules." The discovery gave them hope, but time was running out. Each night, the stars grew a little dimmer. Children pointed to the sky, asking their parents why there were fewer stars than in their books. Telescopes that once showed magnificent galaxies now revealed only faint smudges of light. As the first year of the initiative came to an end, Hannah stood on the roof of the research facility, looking up at the fading universe. Behind her, thousands of scientists worked through the night. In labs across the world, humans refused to give up. "We're not done yet," she whispered to the darkening sky. "We're just getting started." The stars continued to dim, but for the first time since the crisis began, humanity had something even more powerful than light. They had hope. The alarm in Commander Tay Park's quarters rang precisely at 500 hours, as it had every day for the past 3 years. He swung his legs over the side of his bed and rubbed his face, feeling the stubble on his chin. Through his window, he could see the construction lights glowing against the dark sky, a sky that grew darker with each passing month. "Status report," he said, activating his room's communication system. "Arc 1 is at 82% completion. Arc 2 at 76%. 3 through 5 remain on schedule," replied the calm voice of his assistant. Tay nodded to himself. They were cutting it close, but still on track. He dressed quickly in his uniform and headed to the command center, passing hundreds of workers already beginning their shifts. The massive complex in what used to be the Gobi Desert now housed over 50,000 people: engineers, scientists, construction workers, and their families. The ARC project was humanity's insurance policy. If the Prometheus initiative couldn't stop the accelerating expansion of the universe, these 5 enormous vessels would carry the human race through the coming darkness. "Good morning, Commander," said Jin, his second in command, handing him a steaming cup of coffee as he entered the control room. The wall-sized screens showed construction progress on all 5 arcs. "How's the situation with the food production modules on Arc 3? Tay asked, taking a grateful sip. "Fixed. The algae tanks are now operating at full capacity. We've also improved the recycling efficiency by another 2%. Tay nodded. Every percentage point mattered when you were building vessels meant to sustain human life for potentially hundreds of years. The arcs weren't just ships, they were complete ecosystems. Each one measured over 5 kilometers long, with multiple connected habitation rings that rotated to create artificial gravity. They contained farms, factories, schools, hospitals, and housing for up to 2 billion people. Half of Earth's population could fit inside all 5 arcs combined. "Sir, Dr. Lee is requesting to speak with you," Jin said, looking at his tablet. "Says it's urgent." Tay felt a flutter of hope. Dr. Jun Lee had been working with the Prometheus initiative on the fundamental problem, stopping the universe's accelerated expansion. Any message from him might mean progress. "Put him through to my office." Minutes later, Jun's tired face appeared on Tay's screen. The quantum physicist looked like he hadn't slept in days, his eyes bloodshot but bright with excitement. "We've found something, Tay," Jun said without preamble. "We've discovered particles that might be able to counteract dark energy. We're calling them anchor particles. They could potentially slow down the expansion, maybe even reverse it." Tay leaned forward. "Are you saying we might not need the arcs?" Jun's expression grew cautious. "Don't stop building. We're still years away from a practical application if it works at all. But there's hope." After the call ended, Tay stood by his window, looking out at the massive structures taking shape. Should he tell the workers? Would it help morale to know there might be another solution? Or would it make them complacent when they couldn't afford delays? His thoughts were interrupted by an emergency alert. Reports were coming in from cities around the world. The star Betelgeuse, which had been visibly dimming for months, had finally gone dark. It was one of the last naked-eye stars still visible from Earth. Its disappearance hit people harder than expected. Riots had broken out in 20 major cities. A religious sect calling themselves the Final Night had taken over a government building in Sao Paulo. Food shortages were reported as people panic-bought supplies. "Get me a secure line to President Yoon," Tay ordered. The situation grew worse over the following weeks. As more stars faded from view, public fear intensified. Security around the ARC construction sites had to be tripled. Twice, desperate groups tried to storm the facilities, believing the ARCs were only for the elite. "We need to be more transparent," Tay argued during an emergency council meeting. "Show people the lottery system. Prove that everyone has an equal chance to board." "And risk more attacks?" countered General Cho. "We can't defend against the entire world if they all come at once." The debate was interrupted when an aide rushed in. One of the supply ships bringing critical materials for Arc 2 had been hijacked. The materials, specialized radiation shielding that had taken months to manufacture, were gone. That night, Tay couldn't sleep. He walked through the partially completed interior of Arc 1, listening to the sound of welding and construction continuing even in the night shift. In what would eventually be a park, he found a young worker sitting alone, staring at a small photo. "Sir." The man jumped to his feet when he noticed Tay. "At ease," Tay said. "What's your name?" "Sung, sir. Engineering Team 6. "Family?" Tay asked, gesturing to the photo. Sung nodded. "My wife and daughter, they're in Seoul." "Why aren't they here with you?" "Not enough family quarters yet, sir. I'm on the list." Sung hesitated. "Sir, is it true what they're saying? That there's another way? That we might fix the stars?" News traveled fast even in a secure facility. Tay considered his words carefully. "We're working on multiple solutions. The ARCs are still our best chance." Sung nodded, looking back at his photo. "I tell my daughter to look up at the sky every night to remember what the stars look like. She's only 4. His voice cracked slightly. "I want her to see them again someday." That conversation stayed with Tay as construction continued under increasingly difficult conditions. Supply chains broke down as global infrastructure crumbled. 3 more nations collapsed into anarchy. 6 months later, Dr. Lee's team had a major breakthrough with the anchor particles. They successfully created a small field that temporarily stabilized dark energy in a laboratory setting. It was promising, but scaling it up would take years they might not have. Then came the day when the last visible star disappeared from Earth's night sky. The universe had grown too vast, the distances too great for light to bridge. For the first time in Earth's history, night meant complete darkness. Standing on the observation deck of Arc 1, now 95% complete, Tay looked out at the lightless sky. Around him, the massive engines that would soon power humanity's exodus hummed with potential energy. "Commander," Jin said, approaching quietly, "final population selection is complete. Boarding can begin next month." Tay nodded, his eyes still fixed on the darkness beyond. "And Dr. Lee's team?" "They've requested space on Arc 1 to continue their research. Their equipment is being loaded now." Humanity wasn't giving up. They would carry their fight against the darkness into space itself. The ARCs would launch, carrying not just people and resources, but hope that somewhere in the endless night they would find a way to bring back the light. "Begin final preparations," Tay ordered. "It's time to save what we can." The rumble of the engines vibrated through the bones of everyone aboard Genesis. Commander Tay Park stood at the main observation window, watching as Earth, humanity's home for millions of years, disappeared into the darkness. The blue planet was now just a shadow against the even deeper black of space. "Final separation complete," reported his navigation officer. "All 5 ARCs are now on trajectory." Tay nodded, his throat tight. 2 billion people distributed across 5 massive ships heading into the unknown. Another 3 billion had been left behind. There simply wasn't enough room or resources for everyone. The lottery had been as fair as possible, but that didn't make the leaving any easier. "Commander," Jin said quietly beside him, "it's time for your address." Taking a deep breath, Tay turned to face the camera. The feed would broadcast to all, 5 arcs simultaneously, their last unified moment before the ship spread out across different regions of space to improve humanity's chances of survival. Citizens of Earth, he began, his voice steady despite the weight in his chest. Today marks both an end and a beginning. We have left our home behind, but we carry it with us, in our memories, in our traditions, and in our determination to survive. We don't know what awaits us in the darkness, but we face it together. This is not the end of humanity. It is simply our next chapter. As Tay finished his speech, the lights throughout the ship dimmed briefly. An intentional moment of silence for those left behind. Then life aboard Genesis continued. It had to. 3 months into their journey, Dr. Hana Kim stood in her laboratory, staring at simulation results on her screen. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept properly. The data wasn't making sense, or perhaps she just didn't want to accept what it was telling her. Run it again, she told her assistant, who nodded wearily. The door slid open and Dr. Junli entered, carrying 2 cups of synthetic coffee. He placed one beside Hana. You need to rest, he said simply. Not until I figure this out. She gestured at the screen. The dark energy readings are still increasing. The universe is expanding faster than our models predicted. At this rate, she couldn't finish the sentence. June nodded grimly. I know. Even the arcs won't outrun it forever. They had planned for the arcs to travel for decades, perhaps centuries, searching for pockets of stability in the expanding universe. But if their new calculations were correct, such pockets might not exist. There has to be another way, Hana whispered. That night, unable to sleep, Hana wandered to the community gardens on level 7. The vast hydroponics bay was designed to mimic Earth's day-night cycle. Artificial sunlight streamed down on rows of vegetables and fruit trees. Children who had been born on Earth were teaching those born aboard Genesis about the tastes of different fruits. This one's a strawberry, a 10-year-old boy explained, to a wide-eyed 5-year-old. They used to grow wild where my grandma lived. The children spoke of Earth as if it were a fairy tale, a magical place that existed only in stories. The youngest ones had never seen a real star. Watching them, Hana felt a renewed determination. These children deserved more than a lifetime of drifting through darkness. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. During a routine scan of nearby space, Genesis detected something extraordinary, a neutron star in its final stages of collapse. Such events had become increasingly rare as stars across the universe faded, pulled apart by the accelerating expansion. This could be our chance, Hana explained excitedly to Commander Park in the emergency meeting she'd called. When stars die, they release massive amounts of energy, including the exotic particles we've been trying to synthesize. You're talking about harvesting energy from a dying star? Tay asked, looking at the projection showing the collapsed star. Precisely. The particles released during stellar death contain properties that could potentially reverse the expansion process. We could use them to create what we're calling stellar seeds, devices capable of igniting artificial stars. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. You're not just talking about survival, Jin said slowly. You're talking about fighting, back against the darkness. Hana nodded. We've been running simulations for weeks. We believe we can create a device that would harvest these particles and use them to ignite a fusion reaction similar to a natural star. If it works, June added cautiously, we could potentially create new stars wherever we go. The council debated for hours. The plan was dangerous. Approaching a collapsing star meant risking everyone aboard Genesis. But the alternative was simply postponing extinction. Begin preparations, Tay finally ordered. But we'll need volunteers for the harvester team. I won't order anyone into that kind of danger. To everyone's surprise, there was no shortage of volunteers. People lined up outside the command center, willing to risk everything for a chance to bring light back to the universe. The harvester ship was small compared to Genesis, just large enough for the specialized equipment and a crew of 5. As final preparations were made, Hana ran another series of tests on the collection apparatus. The simulations look good, she told the team, But we've never tested this in real conditions, no one has. The Harvester team, led by Senior Engineer Q, a veteran of Earth's space program, listened carefully to her instructions. They knew the risks. The collapsing star would emit radiation that would fry their systems and likely kill them if they got too close. But they needed to get close enough to collect the particles. Launch day arrived too quickly. As the Harvester prepared to depart, hundreds gathered in the viewing gallery to watch. Among them was a small boy who pressed his hand against the glass. "My dad's going to make new stars," he told anyone who would listen, his voice filled with both pride and fear. The Harvester detached from Genesis with barely a sound. The tiny ship looked fragile against the vast emptiness as it accelerated toward the dying star, a pinpoint of fading light in the distance. For 3 days, everyone aboard Genesis held their breath. Communications with the Harvester grew increasingly, distorted as it approached the star's intense radiation field. "We're in position," came Q's broken voice over the comm. "Beginning collection sequence." Then silence. Hours passed with no word. In the science lab, Hana and June watched their instruments looking for any sign that the collection had worked. Nothing. "We've lost them," someone whispered. Then, just as hope began to fade, the sensors lit up. The Harvester was returning, damaged but intact. As it limped back toward Genesis, data began streaming in. They had done it. They had collected the particles. The celebration was cut short when the Harvester docked. 3 of the 5 crew members were already dead from radiation exposure. Q and another engineer survived just long enough to ensure the collected material was safely transferred. That night, as the medical team fought to save the dying crew members, Hana stood over the containment unit holding the harvested particles. They glowed with an eerie blue light, the last remnants of a star that had burned for billions of years. "Was it worth it?" June asked softly behind her. Hana touched the container gently. "We'll make it worth it." 2 weeks later, they were ready for the first test. The prototype stellar seed was small, about the size of a person's fist, but within it was the potential to create a new star. As the seed was loaded into the launch tube, Tay addressed the gathered crowd. "Whatever happens today, we honor the sacrifice of our friends. They believed in a future with light. Let's see if they were right." The launch sequence began. The seed ejected from Genesis, traveling several thousand kilometers away before activating. Everyone watched the monitors, hardly daring to breathe. At first, nothing happened. Then a spark, a flash, and an explosion that rocked Genesis even at this distance. The prototype had failed catastrophically, releasing all its energy at once. 7. Crew members died in the blast wave that hit Genesis. Entire sections of the ship were damaged. As they worked to repair the ship and mourn their dead, Hana returned to her calculations. Something had gone wrong with the containment field. The energy had been released too quickly, too violently. Standing in the damaged lab surrounded by broken equipment and the weight of failure, Hana made a promise to herself. They would try again. They had to. The darkness would not win. 20. Years had passed since Earth disappeared into darkness. Life aboard Genesis had settled into a rhythm of sorts. Babies were born, elders passed away, young people fell in love, and the hydroponics gardens grew enough food to keep everyone fed. But it wasn't truly living, not really. It was merely existing, drifting through an endless night. Sue Park stood before the memorial wall, her fingers lightly tracing her mother's name among the thousands etched into the metal. She had been only 3 years old when her mother died, in the first failed stellar seed test. Now at 23, Sue had inherited both her father's leadership position and her mother's scientific brilliance. "I thought I'd find you here," came a voice behind her. Commander Tay Park had aged considerably in 20 years. His once black hair was now mostly gray, deep lines etched around his eyes from decades of responsibility. "Just saying hello," Sue replied, her hand dropping from the memorial wall. Tay nodded, understanding. They both carried their grief differently, but it was always there. A shadow companion in a universe already too full of shadows. The council is waiting, he said gently. The sensors picked up something unusual. Sue's eyes widened. In 20 years of drifting, unusual had become a word rarely used. The science console showed a faint signal, barely distinguishable from background radiation. But it was there, unmistakable to those who had spent their lives studying such things. It's a neutron star, Dr. Min explained, pointing to the readout. Min had been just a junior researcher during the first Harvester mission. Now he led the science division. It's in the final stages of collapse. The council members exchanged glances. They all knew what this meant. A potential second chance. How long do we have? Tay asked. 3 days, maybe 4, before it completes its collapse. We'd need to launch immediately to reach it in time. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Everyone remembered what had happened the last time. Do we still have the Harvester technology? Council member Jun asked. Min nodded. We've refined it over the years. In theory, it should be safer. Now, in theory, someone muttered. Sue stepped forward. We've spent 20 years improving the stellar seed design as well. The containment field is more stable. The release mechanism is better controlled. But we've never been able to test it, Tay reminded everyone. Not without the particles from a dying star. The debate continued for hours. Some argued it was too risky. Genesis had found a kind of stability. They had enough resources to last another century. Why risk everything on another attempt that might fail just as catastrophically as the first? Others pointed out the obvious. A century of drifting wasn't a future. It was just a slightly prolonged end. Finally, Tay called for a vote. The decision was made. They would try again. I'm leading the mission, Sue announced later that night in her father's quarters. Tay looked up sharply. Absolutely not. I'm the most qualified person aboard this ship. I've spent my entire life studying the stellar seed technology. I understand the harvester systems better than anyone. I've already lost your mother to this. I won't lose you too. Sue's expression softened. Dad, we're not just fighting for our survival anymore. We're fighting for the right to see light again, to live in a universe where darkness isn't the only constant. She placed her hand on his. Mom believed in this enough to die for it. Don't ask me to believe in it less. The argument lasted well into the night, but in the end, Tay knew she was right. Sue was indeed the most qualified, and more importantly, she had the right to choose her own path, even if it terrified him. Preparations for the Harvester mission moved quickly. The improved vessel was larger than the original, with better radiation shielding and more sophisticated collection equipment. The team would consist of 5 specialists, with Sue as mission commander. The night before launch, a small celebration was held in the community hall. It wasn't exactly festive, everyone knew the dangers, but it was important to acknowledge the moment. Children who had never seen starlight sang old Earth songs about the sun and the moon. An elderly woman who had been a teacher on Earth told stories about camping under summer stars, describing constellations to wide-eyed children who had never seen such wonders. Many of the adults found themselves wiping away tears remembering what had been lost. Later, in the quiet of her quarters, Sue reviewed the mission parameters one last time. A soft knock at her door interrupted her concentration. Come in, she called. A young man named Hoon entered carrying a small package. He had been training as an engineer under Sue for the past 3 years. More recently, they had begun spending time together outside of work as well. I brought you something, he said, handing her the package. Inside was a small holo projector. When activated, it displayed a perfect recreation of Earth's night sky as it had once been, filled with stars and the soft glow of the Milky Way. My grandfather recorded this before we left Earth, Hoon explained. He wanted our family to remember. Sue watched the stars slowly rotate in the projection, her eyes reflecting their light. It's beautiful, she whispered. Bring it back to us, Hoon said simply, and they both knew he wasn't talking about the holoprojector. The launch went smoothly. The Harvester separated from Genesis and began its journey toward the dying neutron star. From the observation deck, Tay watched until the ship was just a tiny speck against the endless black, and then longer still, until there was nothing to see at all. For 3 days, Genesis maintained constant communication with the Harvester. Sue provided regular updates on their approach. The neutron star's radiation was intense but within the tolerances of their shielding. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Then, on the 4th day, as they initiated the collection sequence, the communication became spotty. "We're experiencing interference." Sue's voice crackled through the speakers. "The star, unstable. Beginning collection now." For 20 agonizing minutes, Genesis received nothing but static. The entire ship seemed to hold its breath, hundreds gathering in the communications center waiting for word. When Sue's voice finally came through again, it was weak but triumphant. "Collection successful. We have the particles. Repeat, collection successful." A cheer erupted throughout Genesis. People hugged each other, laughing and crying at the same time, but the celebration was premature. "Our engines are damaged," Sue continued. "Radiation levels higher than expected. We're not going to make it back." The silence that followed was deafening. "Sue," Tay's voice broke as he spoke into the communicator. "There must be a way." "We're going to transfer the data," she replied, ignoring his plea. "All our readings, everything you'll need to perfect the stellar seed. The Harvester's autopilot can bring the particles back to you." "And the crew?" someone asked, though everyone already knew the answer. "We've done what we came to do," Sue said simply. "The rest is up to you now." Over the next hour, the Harvester transmitted everything they had learned. As the radiation continued to damage their systems, the quality of transmission deteriorated. Sue's final message was barely audible. "Dad," she said, her voice fading in and out. "When you light the first star, look at it and know I'm there." The Harvester's autopilot functioned as designed. 8 hours later, the small ship docked, with Genesis carrying its precious cargo but no living crew members. As Tay stood in the airlock, watching the containment unit being carefully removed from the damaged vessel, he made a silent vow. His daughter's sacrifice, like his wife's, before her, would not be in vain. They would succeed no matter what it took. In the lab, Dr. Min and his team worked day and night, incorporating everything they had learned from the Harvester mission. The new stellar seed design was tested and retested in simulations. No one mentioned the possibility of failure. It simply wasn't an option anymore. 3 weeks after the Harvester returned, Genesis broadcasted a message to the other 4 arcs, scattered across different regions of space. For the first time in nearly a decade, all 5 ships confirmed communication. "We have the means to create light," Tay announced to his fellow commanders. "We're asking all arcs to converge at these coordinates. Together, we will witness humanity's first step toward reclaiming the stars." Hope, which had been just a whisper for so long, began to grow louder aboard Genesis. In the darkness that had become all they knew, something new was beginning to spark. The 5 arcs converged slowly, their massive hulls drifting toward the predetermined coordinates like ancient whales gathering for a mysterious purpose. It had taken months for them to adjust their courses and reach this empty region of space, a place with nothing special to mark it, except the fact that they had chosen it together. Aboard Genesis, Commander Tay Park stood at the main observation window, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. At 72, he was one of the few remaining who had been an adult on Earth. Most of the others had been children then, and more than half of those aboard all 5 arcs had been born in space, never knowing what it meant to stand beneath an open sky filled with stars. "All arcs report ready position, Commander," said Jin's grandson, who now served as Tay's communications officer. The young man had never known his grandfather, who had died during the early years of their journey, but he carried his name proudly. Tay nodded. "Begin final preparations for stellar seed deployment." Throughout Genesis, people gathered around view screens or made their way to observation decks. 20 years of drifting through darkness, of existing rather than truly living, had led to this moment. The other arcs reported similar scenes, humanity collectively holding its breath. In the Launch Control Center, Dr. Min's team made final adjustments to the stellar seed. The device was surprisingly small considering its purpose, barely larger than a standard supply crate. Inside, however, it contained the exotic particles harvested from the dying neutron star, carefully balanced with the technology designed to spark a controlled fusion reaction. "All diagnostic checks complete," reported the chief engineer. "The seed is ready." Tay joined them in the control center, his face solemn. He had refused to allow himself hope until this moment. Too many had sacrificed everything to get them here. His wife Hannah, his daughter Sue, and countless others. To hope too early felt like dishonoring their memory. "Open ship-to-ship communication," he ordered. The faces of the other 4 ARC commanders appeared on the main screen. Some old friends, others new leaders who had risen through the ranks over the decades. All looked as tense as Tay felt. "Today, we attempt what no species has ever done," Tay said, his voice steady despite the emotions roiling within him. "We don't just adapt to the universe as it is. We reshape it to what it should be." He paused, looking around at the assembled crew. "Whatever happens next, I am proud to have traveled through the darkness with all of you." With a nod to Dr. Min, Tay gave the final order. "Launch the seed." The seed ejected smoothly from Genesis, propelled into the empty void at a safe distance from the arcs. For several long minutes nothing happened. The seed drifted, dark and seemingly lifeless, just another piece of human technology floating in the endless night. In the control center, Dr. Min's team monitored their instruments closely. "The initial fusion sequence has begun," one of them announced, though there was nothing visible yet to the watching crowds. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. Doubt began to creep in. Children grew restless. Adults whispered to each other, their faces showing the strain of hope deferred once again. "Something's wrong," someone finally said aloud. "It should have ignited by now." Dr. Min shook his head, studying his readings. "The reaction is happening, but it's slower than we anticipated. The containment field is holding stable. We just need to be patient." Patience, however, was a resource nearly as depleted as hope after 20 years of darkness. People began to drift away from the observation decks, their shoulders slumped in disappointment. Tay remained at the window, unwilling to leave. "I promised Sue I would watch," he whispered to himself. "I won't look away." It happened as most truly momentous things do, without warning, and when many had stopped watching. A tiny pinprick of light appeared where the seed had been deployed. So small at first that Tay thought his aging eyes were deceiving him. "Look!" shouted a young child somewhere behind him, pointing excitedly. "What's that?" All heads turned back, to the viewports. The pinprick grew steadily brighter, a spot of pure brilliance against the absolute black of space. It expanded, strengthened, began to pulse with energy that the instruments aboard Genesis registered as true stellar fusion. "It's working," breathed Dr. Min, his voice filled with wonder. "It's actually working." Word spread throughout all 5 arcs. People rushed back to observation decks, crowding the windows to witness what most had never seen in their lives: the birth of a star. The light grew until it bathed the 5 arcs in a warm glow. Children backed away from the suddenly bright windows, their eyes unused to such intensity. Parents who remembered Earth's sun wept openly, the sensation of light on their faces bringing back memories long suppressed. Aboard Genesis, an elderly woman who had been a botanist on Earth touched the glass of the observation window, her fingers trembling. "Plants," she whispered. "Real plants will grow again." In the hydroponics bay, the artificial lights were temporarily switched off, allowing the new star's illumination to filter in through the transparent ceiling. The seedlings seemed to stretch toward it instinctively, as if recognizing something their caretakers had been unable to provide: true starlight. The celebration spread across all 5 arcs as the artificial star stabilized. It wasn't as large as Earth's sun, closer to a red dwarf in size and output, but it was real. It was theirs. They had created light in a universe determined to extinguish it. In the days that followed, Dr. Min's team analyzed every aspect of the new star. It was functioning exactly as designed, a controlled fusion reaction that would burn steadily for billions of years. More importantly, the data confirmed what they had hoped. The process was reproducible. 1 week after the star's ignition, the commanders of all 5 arcs met in Genesis's council chamber. The mood was markedly different from any previous gathering. The room itself seemed brighter, the faces less lined with worry. The stellar seed technology works, Tay began, looking around at his colleagues. Now we must decide what to do next. And the youngest commander, a woman named Yuna, who had been born aboard Arc 3, spoke up first. We create more stars, obviously, as many as we can. And then what? Asked another commander. Do we settle around these new stars? Build new worlds? The conversation flowed freely, filled with an energy that had been absent for decades. Some argued for establishing permanent colonies around the new stars. Others wanted to travel further, to spread the light as widely as possible throughout the darkened universe. Tay listened to them all, feeling a strange peace settle over him. When the room finally quieted, he shared his thoughts. For 20 years we've been running from the darkness, he said. Now, I think we have a different purpose. We've discovered we can bring light back to the universe. Not just for ourselves, but for any other species out there drifting as we were. He paused, looking out the window at their newborn star. I believe our mission now is to become the Lightbringers. The council ultimately agreed to a bold plan. The arcs would separate again, each traveling to different regions of space. They would create networks of stars, building new stellar neighborhoods in the emptiness. They would leave beacons, messages in dozens of languages, guides for any other survivors to find them. As Genesis prepared to depart for its next destination, Tay made his way to the memorial wall one last time. He stood before the names of his wife and daughter, his fingers tracing the letters as Sue had done before her. Final mission. We did it, he told them quietly. You were right all along. The darkness isn't the end. That night, for the first time in decades, children across all 5 arcs were told to make a wish on the brightest star they could see. Just one star hanging in the blackness. But it was enough to start with. From that single point of light, humanity would build a new beginning. As Genesis engaged its engines and began moving away from their first created star, Tay stood at the observation window. He didn't need to look back to know the light was still there. Instead, he looked ahead into the darkness that still surrounded them. Somewhere out there were the perfect coordinates for their next star, and after that, another and another. The universe had challenged humanity with extinction, and humanity had answered with creation. This is just the beginning, Tay whispered, as Genesis carried its precious cargo of life deeper into the void, not fleeing anymore, but searching for the perfect spots to ignite the next points of light in humanity's new constellation.